This episode of Coffee with Kenobi is dedicated to the memory of Marcus Doring. Marcus Doring just passed away. He was a wonderful member of the Star Wars community, a husband, a father, a member of the 501st, the first person to see at any Star Wars event that would come up, chat with you, give you a hug, ask you about how you and your family were doing. He is a man I will greatly miss. Marcus, may the stars light your way, my friend, praying for the repose of your soul. And now a moment of silence for Marcus. Thanks, everybody. Now on to the show.
This is Tom Kane, the voice of Yoda in Star Wars The Clone Wars, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z. This is the podcast you're looking for.
Jedi. Ahsoka is Jedi.
And because of you, I did survive. And not only that, I was able to lead others to survive as well.
Anger and frustration are quick to give power. But they also unbalance you.
Work fast. I'm going out there. Out there? Out where? Just keep working.
Everything you've heard about me is true.
This is James Arnold Taylor, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi. I have a good feeling about this.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to Coffee with Kenobi. This is your weekly spoiler-free place for Star Wars community and conversation. I'm your host, Dan Zayer, delighted to be talking Star Wars with each and every one of you. Since May of 2013, whether you're a fan of Star Wars films, Disney Plus live action and animation, books, comics, collectibles, or Star Wars opportunities at the Disney theme parks, on Coffee with Kenobi, you are among friends as we virtually share a cup of coffee while talking about this galaxy far, far away. Thank you to the official travel partner of Coffee with Kenobi, MEI and Mousefan Travel. Check out coffeewithkenobi.com/mousefan-travel for a no-cost, no-obligation quote, and let them know that Coffee with Kenobi and Dan Zayer sent you. CWK is also brought to you by Thomas Coffee, a fresh artisan coffee expertly roasted since 1905. Thomas Coffee provides customers of all taste palates with a delicious coffee profile customizable with over 25 flavor offerings. There's a taste for everybody and an experience with every cup. I have a special discount code exclusively to Coffee with Kenobi listeners. Use the code DANZCWK10 for 10% off your order. On today's show, Ross Hollebon and Jen Sopchockchai join me to talk about Part 4 of Disney Plus's Ahsoka. So pull up a chair, grab your favorite coffee mug, and let's have some coffee with Kenobi. Here we are, friends. It is time to break down the brand new episode of Ahsoka, which we say every week. And thank goodness we've got new Ahsoka every week because we get to talk all about this incredible series. And I am joined by two incredible guest co-hosts. You know them, you love them. Let's bring them in first. Jen Sopchockchai from the Long Take.
Hi, Dan. Great to be back again. And for what a wow of an episode. I think that's the most common thing I've heard so far is just wow.
Wow, that was what I put in the cafe. I just put, wow, all caps, of course. It's definitely cap worthy. He's also cap worthy. I think he's a Caps fan. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely.
Ross Hollebon from the Fantha Treks.
Hello, friends, and let's just dive in because this was amazing.
Okay, so I guess we're excited to talk about it, and I am with you. Let's start with you, Jen. Give me one word as far as describing the episode and overall reactions.
My one word is haunting. I landed on that because, not necessarily because the tone of this episode was spookier than previous ones necessarily, but to me, the core of this episode and sort of the narrative climax it seems like we've reached or about to reach is Ahsoka confronting her past, right? She has a line in this episode where she explicitly tells Baylan, I'm not here to talk about my past. Well, guess what? The rest of this episode does not agree. And so, yeah, for me, it was all about kind of like the past coming back to haunt Ahsoka, and she really has to kind of hopefully deal with it and kind of reconcile with it in some way next.
I agree. And obviously, I didn't say at the beginning, but it stands to reason that if you're listening to the show, you realize that we're going to be spoiling it. We're going to be talking about, we are reviewing the episode, which is called Fallen Jedi. I don't believe I mentioned that, but this is, of course, titled Fallen Jedi. Ross, it's just so that everyone knows when we're doing these recordings, you can put your name on the screen naturally. And Jen says Qui-Gon Jinn, as you would expect. Mine says Dan Zer. I don't know how I came up with that. And then Ross, tell us what yours says.
Balin's beard, because it is sharp. He obviously doesn't use Just for Men, and I go along right with it with the gray in my beard. So big fan.
You both have a lot of clout for sure. So is that your word for the episode? Are you going to hyphenate Balin's beard, or what's your one word for the episode?
No, that was my approach to cheating, and it worked wonderfully. So my word for the episode is conflict, because I just feel like that resonated through so many characters and so many themes and scenes throughout this episode. So it was, as exciting as it was, there was that tension that a great conflict story tells.
Outstanding. My word for the episode is spectacular. It's spectacular. This episode, I was talking with some friends today. I think this is the Star Wars I've been waiting for since Return of the Jedi. I mean, it's absolutely wonderful in so many ways, which we will certainly talk about. I did something with this episode I have never done with anything on Disney Plus for Star Wars, or anything at all. As soon as the episode was over, Mason and I looked at each other and I said, "You want to watch it again?" And he goes, "Yep." And we watched it again, back to back, boom, right away, not even thinking about it, because it's amazing. It's spectacular. What more can you say? Well, you can say a lot more, hopefully, because you're listening to this podcast and we want to talk about it. So, Jen, earlier when we were doing a little bit of pregame session, you had mentioned that as great as this whole thing is, most of the meat is centered more towards the second half of the episode, and I agree with you. So let's just at least address sort of the opening sequence all the way up to, I guess, the lightsaber duel in the forest, maybe? And then I think from there we can take the second half. But what do you want to say about the first half of the episode? Again, we're not shortchanging it, but most of the meat is on the second half.
I think there was a good, to go along with what Ross said, a really good ramping up of the tension, and sort of it had, the scenes themselves had sort of a calm before the storm, the classic sort of preparing for battle feel to it. But the conversations that were happening were so incredibly tense and had so much foreshadowing that every second afterwards, I was very stressed out. So in particular, when Hu Yang says, I only want to ask you one thing. Can you try to stay together? I've always thought that you've done better when you're together, right? I'm not getting that. I did have that written down somewhere, but I can't find it now, verbatim. But he basically said something like that. And then that every moment after that, it's like, no, stay together. Oh no, they're separating. Oh no. So I thought that was really, really well crafted script for this episode because of that, because it really set everything up in that early scene that would then sort of pay off in a big way later in the episode.
I want to ask you about this. We hinted around to it last week at the end of part 3, but the majority of the first half of this episode takes place in a forest, surrounded by leaves that can only be described as autumn, I would say, in tone. Talk to me about the symbolism of that. I'm kind of putting you on the spot there, but I don't know.
Sure. I was just trying to give Ross a chance to jump in, because
that was yes,
and I thought it was directed towards you, so I was sitting back seeing where you're going to go.
I mean, I've got a couple of ideas, but I'm curious to see what you both think.
So, I mean, we have to remind ourselves, and I've heard criticisms of the series. Like, I think I was reading a review this morning that was sort of like, for a show called Ahsoka, it's not really about Ahsoka, which I don't agree with.
I find that to be an anti-intellectual stance.
But like, it has a very strong ensemble cast, and all the characters are very important. So, like, I could see why someone might mistake the focus of the show. but I feel like the autumn leaves, if they were to symbolize anything, would be to symbolize Ahsoka's the point she's on in her journey in her life as a force wielder, and that, you know, a lot has happened in her lifetime, as most of us who are, you know, the three of us and then most people who are listening to this probably know a lot of the, if not all of that history. And so this is sort of the autumn season where it's like leaves, the things are falling off the trees. She's, you know, in the, what presumably is sort of like at least the start of the final chapter of her life, right? And so it's sort of like this time of reflection, getting towards the end of the year, and really sort of trying to really feeling that for the first time, because I think this episode, what it does so well is sort of highlights how Ahsoka has made lots of mistakes in her life. Ones we don't even know about, which I definitely want to talk about later, or ones that are hinted at that we haven't really heard about before. She's made a lot of mistakes, and she's been through a lot. And how is that really all going to bear on the present moment and what she's choosing to do now?
Yes, absolutely. I love that. I was thinking about, of course, with autumn, with fall, it's hard not to think about death and rebirth, not in a phoenix, classical mythological trope way, but more like, you know, things get beautiful and then they die and then they eventually will fall down. We don't see leaves falling here. We see the stage being set, which is pretty perfect because Ahsoka does fall at the end of the episode, but there's no reason to believe that she's not going to come right back. I mean, come on. But I do like sort of the juxtaposition of that. Even Ahsoka's skin almost is the color of the leaves, so that might be a bit of a stretch. But I think you could probably do something with that. And the notion that everyone, like Sabine very much dies to self in a way. Well, it's actually, she's not really dying to self. She's being sort of selfish, but in a selfless way, which I'm sure we will get to. I'm more interested in first of all, Hu Yang kung fu fighting. I didn't have that on my bingo card, but that was awesome.
No. Rock'em sock'em robots.
Yeah.
He was really getting it. It was great to see, and I think
it's great.
Actually, really kind of explains why he's survived this long.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's not just a passive. He's not the C-3PO who's willing to be torn into parts and then carried away, right? Like he can take care of himself.
There was no "oh my" uttered from Hu Yang.
Right. I'd be remiss without mentioning. I love this episode, but the weakest point I felt was leading up to the droid fight. The level of nonchalance that we wouldn't normally get when someone's behind enemy lines with a broken down ship, of just going, you know, it was just kind of like, ho hum, we're stuck here, no big deal. The bad guys are only a little bit far away. That was the only thing that was just like, come on. It fed into more, but I feel just being fair to our discussion, I wanted to bring that up.
I'm glad
From there, it completely ramped up and took off in such an amazing fashion. But it was kind of like, Ahsoka, you know something's coming up here. Sabine, you know something's coming up here. How are we just leaving the ramp down and everything's fine?
I didn't catch that the first time. The second time I was aware of it, but I also thought these two have been in so many insane skirmishes, and I don't think that they necessarily knew there was going to be several force wielders there. Maybe obviously they knew there was going to be one, I should say obviously, but most likely. So I totally see what you're saying. I'm interested in, and Mason and I talked about this a lot. Why does Ahsoka, who clearly uses two lightsabers, why did she switch to one for the entire second half of the episode? And I have a couple of theories. I think there's some symbolism there as well, but I see both of you shaking your head. And Ross, we'll just start with you on that. What do you think?
No, I was fascinated by that as well. And especially when she did go to the one and it turned more into that samurai pose. Like as when she killed Marok and let go his Night Sister magic spell or whatever it was that was existing inside that shell, it brought me back to the Clone Wars when Kenobi defeated Maul.
Yes.
Where Maul was making this, you know, it was entertainment. It was almost like Indiana Jones, where the guy has the big sword And then Indy just pulls out his gun and shoots him. It was one very smart move, paying attention to what the enemy's providing and taking advantage of that one thing. So all I thought, I was like, oh, that's Obi-Wan and Maul right there.
This is Vanessa Marshall, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
Thomas Coffee started in 1905 and has grown and established itself as a premier coffee. They have over 25 different flavors of coffee, including classics like almond, hazelnut, French vanilla, and so many more. And for the more adventurous coffee drinkers, flavor offerings include banana hazelnut, chocolate raspberry, maple bacon, and more. Thomas Coffee is known for 5 different single origin coffees with a variety of different blends and roast profiles. The expertise in coffee craft is built on hard work and rooted in over a century of dutifully cultivating a network of coffee partners throughout the world. From conscientious growers in the finest coffee regions on earth, they roast their coffee in-house to make sure that they are sending out the best products possible to Thomas Coffee customers. Plus, Thomas Coffee ships nationwide too. You can order Thomas Coffee on their website, thomascoffee.com, and find them on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. For my Coffee with Kenobi listeners, you can use the discount code DANZCWK10 for 10% off your order. That's DANZCWK10 for 10% off your order. Get some Thomas Coffee and don't forget to use that code. It reminds me, I'm going to give a shout out to a friend of the show, and he was a former guest, Brian DeSutter. He's never seen Rebels, so he is watching the entire series concurrently with Ahsoka. And I think he's about halfway through the second season. And I said, have you gotten to the episode yet where Ahsoka fights 2 Inquisitors at once? He says, no. And I said, just wait. I said, because that entire moment was terrific because she's timing it, as you some people may know, the Inquisitor having the option of spinning their blade is because they are not as strong in the Force as most people they are defeating. So that gives them allegedly some sort of an advantage. Ahsoka times it beautifully. I almost seem to enjoy it, not in a sadistic way, but just sort of like, I got this kind of a game on sort of a way. But Jen, I want to get your take too on the 1 versus 2 lightsabers.
I mean, I think it shows that as a fighter, she knows that sometimes less is more. Because it really to piggyback on Ross thought of was it Twin Sons is the name of the Maul Kenobi episode? Yeah.
Yes.
I thought of the Tales of the Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
where she dispatches another Inquisitor really, really quickly. And I had the same reaction to this where it's like, oh, it's so short, but it's so tense for a duration and then comes to a dramatic conclusion. And, she didn't even have a lightsaber in that fight at all, from what I remember. Right.
Right.
And so I think it's sort of like it's the anti-Grievous move, right? Of like less, we can do more with less, and like when she does use it to, it kind of shows us that she's not doing that to sort of be extra or kind of flashy, right? She's doing it with the purpose in mind. The other thing too is like
efficiently lethal.
Yes, exactly. And to me, when she's dueling Balin towards the end, it definitely has kind of like almost like a Jedi training sparring feel to it because of just the position he's taking. They kind of switch off, like he's in the one position and she's in the other, and they kind of reverse. So I thought just aesthetically I think that was a beautiful choice.
It was gorgeous, very well filmed. And again, the sound mixing of this series, the lightsabers really stood out even more than they normally do, which is saying something. I don't know enough. I don't know anything about fighting with a katana or anything with Taekwondo. I will say, I know this is going to give me all kinds of street cred, but I was a white belt when I was 8 years old. I know that's very impressive. I know, but I didn't retain any of that training. I don't know anything about sword fighting. So I can't pretend to tell you from an actual practical point of view what 2 versus 1 means. I know that to fight with 2 lightsabers is considered very respectable, a very challenging thing to learn how to do. I know that Anakin and Yoda worked with Ahsoka to craft using that, and she uses 2 lightsabers to survive Order 66. You probably don't need to go on from that, but I will. She uses it throughout the Clone Wars as she's building her career as Fulcrum, helping, the rebellion go into the New Republic. 2 blades, always 2 blades. But then she switches to 1. To me, 2's become very defensive, right? Whereas 1, she's more aggressive, right? I mean, she destroys that Inquisitor, and that's, par for the course in this series, or just in Star Wars in general. But I notice it more with Baylan. It's almost like there's like a lot of bravado here. And, I'm not here to talk about my past. Baylan knows how to pick those threads. And when we watched it, and you probably noticed this too, she's the one who starts the fight. He waits and he waits and he waits. It reminded me of The Empire Strikes Back with Luke and Vader. But Ahsoka turns on hers right away, and she also attacks first. So Baylan turns it on to defend himself. He clearly is a very capable wielder of the Force and using a lightsaber. But I think that's really interesting. And I froze the screen on this. He says, you and your master's path is one of death and destruction. He says probably, I guess we're just going to the end. He says like 3 different times during the fight. He very much, he doesn't sort of walk around. He very much directly attacks her and says, no, you're the killer. You're the one who does the death and destruction thing. I don't know that with Ahsoka. It hasn't been shown yet, but there's something going on here. I mean, it's called Fallen Jedi, but I don't think it's Fallen Jedi because of the end. And I don't think it's called Fallen Jedi because of Baylan. I think there's something more going on that we are just getting hints to. That's a lot, but I don't know. I think that is sort of the meat of this thing. You mentioned earlier, Jen, this notion that Ahsoka is fighting with her what's going on internally. We're not really seeing that except for sort of loosely, we've seen her deal with the idea of Anakin turning into Vader. But we haven't really seen a ton of internal struggle from Ahsoka to this degree. When she leaves the Jedi Order, yes. But this is a whole other thing.
I think Baylan really is the MVP of this episode, and it was so wonderful to hear sort of his philosophy and sort of what's motivating him, because I think it's been largely shrouded in mystery until this point, right? We know he's working for Morgan, but what is his agenda? He seems to not quite, he's not rah Thrawn, right? As we really find out in this episode. And I think it's clear that the Jedi Order has scarred him, right? And that he's real and what's so interesting is that Maul and Ahsoka were such a great pairing because they were sort of 2 sides of the same coin. And I feel like I'm getting the same sense here where they both have had their issues with the Jedi Order, but they're choosing to deal with it in very different ways. And so I think his thing is like, he has the very classic villain, you can't create unless you destroy. So he clearly wants to remake the galaxy in the way that he thinks it should be, but it seems very much in response to the failings of the Jedi Order. And so I think he's looping Ahsoka in with that, even though she herself would probably say, no, I'm not a part of the Jedi Order either.
Right.
When I think that goes back to some of, let's go back to those autumn leaves. Baylan really drives that throughout this episode, talking about, you know what, some things need to die in order for something new to come about. So he flat out says that at one point. And he's got 2 other great quotes that I liked here, two exchanges. The first one, Morgan Elsbeth, is that a note of fear in your voice? And just very stoically, he's like, experience. And you get that feeling from him there. But then another point, she talks to him about faith. And all he says is faith. I lost that a long time ago. So his depth and what we're going to learn about him as well. Like, Jen, I think you nailed it in terms of this is the same path for characters from a different place.
Yeah. And he clearly associates her with Anakin and Anakin with as emblematic of the problems of the Jedi Order, right? Because he says when she's like, sort of making a snide remark, oh, he never mentioned you, right? Sort of like trying to insult him. His response is everyone in the Order knew Anakin Skywalker, right? So it's not because he knew him personally. It's just Anakin was so famous as being this very talented Jedi and sort of the chosen one or whatever. If you would live to see what he became, surely that must leave a mark. Is that why you walked away and abandoned him? So that was one of my favorite lines of the whole thing, and really cut to, Dan, you mentioned that we haven't really seen a lot of the Ahsoka's internal struggle, but I think that line gets right to it, right? And it's like really reflects back what Ahsoka must be carrying with her.
And it makes you wonder too, like when right before Ahsoka falls off the dais, he says, it didn't have to come to this, but no other way. And it disarms her, I think, emotionally. But as I'm reflecting on it with the two of you, it makes me wonder, is he talking about Ahsoka? Was there something that happened with the three of them? Or are the sins of the master being placed on the Padawan or the apprentice? I don't know. I don't know. I know I've known for quite some time now that part 5 of this, the halfway point of this series, was going to be a big deal. I didn't know why, but I knew it was going to be a really big deal. And I think we're starting to see why that is. It's interesting. And again, when you watch that fight again, she's more aggressive. I think Rosario Dawson is fabulous in this entire episode, in this entire sequence. And you can sense the frustration, even when she takes, her name is,
Shin Hati.
Shin, and throws her against the rock, like Yoda does with some of the Emperor's Royal Guards in Revenge of the Sith. Like, she's not pulling punches, right? She's not fighting to disarm. Like, there's some aggression there, and we're definitely not used to that with Ahsoka. But boy, is it compelling.
Yeah, and I think she says Sabine, and
she's trying to defend.
She thinks Sabine has died.
Yes.
Yeah, and I love the sort of hypocrisy that comes out in that moment, right? Because the whole first section is Ahsoka trying to make sure that, can I count on you? And she means, can I count on you to be able to let go of Ezra and not let your personal feelings interfere with doing what's right? And, Sabine calls her out. She says, are you sure you think that? And we see her struggle with that in this episode, right? Because that's arguably that is what causes her to lose the duel with Baylan, is that she gets distracted by her feelings for Sabine and worrying about her and being like, is she dead? Oh, she's alive. Oh, because she says Sabine with a very emotional look on her face twice during when she's hanging off the cliff. And so to me, that showed her, that was her moment of weakness, and she couldn't do what she said, that when the stakes are this high, I have to believe that you have to put your personal feelings aside. And so it's really interesting how the sort of like hypocrisy that a lot of people would accuse the Jedi Order of having during the Clone Wars, that is now sort of like resurfacing through Ahsoka. She sort of like internalized that hypocrisy without even realizing it, probably.
Right. And it's so easy to be the Monday morning quarterback and think about what should be done or can be done. But when your life is on the line, you think your friends and you're also worried about creating a brand new war and bringing back. We actually get to hear the line, "The heir to the Empire," which had to make fandom clap and cheer, and rightfully so. But we haven't really talked much about Sabine. Ross, rumor has it that you're a big Sabine fan. What do we learn about Sabine in this episode? Did we learn anything about her, or is it just reinforcing some of her darker times?
She's very rattled at the beginning, where she can't find the ammunition for her blaster. She's got that going on. Ahsoka's kind of prodding her the whole time, like, "Hey, Jen, as you mentioned, Dan, as you've mentioned, are you okay? Can you do this? Are we okay? Yeah, I'm fine. I'm good." But we get to the point where they split up. And at that point, the camera stays on a shot of Sabine's helmet laying on the ground. And I was just like, I remember watching that the first time through and being like, uh-oh, that's not a good shot to see right there.
Right. And the camera's panning sideways while in the foreground is the helmet. Yeah, it's so great.
So I was just like, oh, this doesn't bode well for Lady Ren. And
so what do you think is symbolic about that? I mean, I actually just did a bunch of stuff last semester about film and camera work, but I got to admit, even though I knew that was important, I couldn't quite tell you specifically what it's trying to say, other than she is moving away from her Mandalorian past, or maybe something as simple as she's about to be unarmed emotionally, which obviously does happen.
Yeah, I think losing her way is kind
this
of
is the way, but it's not.
Right? This one, the helmet came off, so this is definitely not the way. And I think that even that comes out a little bit more, and we know Filoni's a big Lord of the Rings fan as well. So as she's holding the map, that's all I could think of was Isildur in Mount Doom getting ready to throw the ring in, and he just couldn't pull the trigger. And as Balin, he takes that deep breath and just like senses everything about her. So kind of how he disarmed Ahsoka talking about Anakin, he did the same thing to her talking about Ezra. And I was like, oh, he is on his Jedi empathy skills are just top notch. And dug into that. And the next thing you know, he's got the Ring of Power / the map in his hand. And the bad guys now, again, have the upper hand. And it's back in play. But Sabine, knowing Sabine and what she's been through already through animation, her arc will be, I imagine, a redemption arc. She's going to get to the point where she saves everyone after she messed up. And I think she's going to recognize that. But we'll see how it plays out. I think it's setting up for that. But I also didn't expect her to cave there quite the way she did.
Do you think she caved because Balin was using the Force on her? Because I feel like, to me, it was sort of, it seemed ambiguous. Like it's a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B, maybe, where he's like, his force power is the psychological, because it really seemed like he was almost sensing her history, right? That he didn't know before, which I don't know if we've ever, you can both answer this probably better than I can. Have we seen that, a Jedi do that, like as a force power, to be able to sort of sense someone's past?
So, I mean, Kylo Ren is able to use the Force to sort of read thoughts, I think.
Well, Vader pulls out that Luke has a sister.
There's that.
So
the devil has power to assume a pleasing shape, as Hamlet would say. I don't think this is the Force at all. I think this is, I mean, that it's very clearly stated. He's the only one you think of as your family. Like, he's your brother. And I just want to say, as a side rant, a really quick side rant, fast forward for 15 seconds, you don't hear this. Thank goodness we're not going to have to deal with shipping these two. Okay, I'm back. Sure. The whole idea here is that that's her family, and she'll do anything to get him back. And who wouldn't want that in a friend? Who wouldn't want that? Now, would you sacrifice Ezra to ensure there's not a war? I would say the answer is no when it comes to Sabine. And you get that because there's one thing that seems more guaranteed than the other. You know, it hasn't been mentioned that Luke Skywalker is still around. I feel like he might have something to say about the strong guy showing up. Who knows what will ever come to that. But no, I think this is purely Sabine is at her weakest emotional point because she's vulnerable because of her love for her dear friend. And that whole family dynamic. I mean, Hera's rushing in to help. She comes in. Of course, it's a little bit too late. But I think this is purely that. And I think that Balin, I was trying to categorize him in Dungeons & Dragons. I would consider him like, he's obviously, I don't know. I would have to ask Thomas, but I think he's evil, but he's like a lawful evil. Like, he's a bad guy. But he has scruples. Like, he saves, when Shin tries to strangle Sabine, he saves Sabine's life. I gave her my word. Her previous master didn't keep her word. I don't think that's necessarily accurate. But, again, manipulation is a powerful tool in evil's box, and it makes Balin really compelling.
And he gets to the point you talked about, Heir of the Empire being mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Balin also says the greater good, which is the second Thrawn book in canon. So
True.
That's where I got excited because I love the canon Thrawn books.
Mm-hmm.
And when he said greater good, I was like, oh, that's not by accident. Like that is
Filoni would know.
Yeah, that is beautiful. And I had heard that he had talked to Zahn a little bit about everything. So it was just kind of like, okay, awesome. He's talked to the author. Maybe he's worked that in because of him. But I got excited just by that little tidbit as well.
Well, we're talking way faster than we normally do. And there's so much more to break down. But I think we've hit some really key ideas here. I just want to say, before we get more into Sabine and Ahsoka and Baylan, when I saw the Ghost in live action, I was screaming. Like, my son even said to me, Dad, I couldn't help it. I was so excited. And, of course, they showed us the last day that the HasLab, the Ghost thing is going on. So it was just great. The sound was there. Seeing her and Jason and Chopper sitting in the Ghost itself, having it fly, having the X-Wings show up, was just awesome. And then we get to see the connective tissue from the Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett. Suddenly his name is escaping me.
It is Carson
Teva, of course. Yeah, Carson is there.
All Sun Young Lee.
That's right.
He's such a fan, and he cosplays, and he's
so cool.
A reason to love Star Wars that much more.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I agree. So that all of that was purely magical. This whole thing, as I said, spectacular. It's again, I thought last week was doing this, and it does, but this is such a wonderful example of tension, lightsaber duels having severe weight and heft and cost associated with them. Stunning revelations that weren't cheap gimmicks. I'm happy that the Inquisitor wasn't like some mysterious villain from the Clone Wars or something like that. I sort of expected it. I'm glad we didn't get that. I'm glad we got this eruption of gas, which normally would make people giggle. That was clearly associated with the Night Sisters in some way. I was so happy that we didn't have to go into cheap WWE reveals and shocking moments, but to stick to the core of the character. Everything done in this is in service to the characters and the story. It's never done to use some cheap special effects or to give you some insincere revelations that don't really amount to much for the overall mythos. All of it is in service to the story. And Jon Favreau said at Celebration Europe this year, Ahsoka is Dave Filoni's magnum opus. And so far, that has been absolutely accurate.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It is, and even that part with the Ghost and the 5 X-Wings, you talk about the audio special effects and how the ships are moving. But like when they jump to light speed and it is that boop, 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 like all on top of each other. Yeah, Phantom. It is like I rewound that. Like as I was doing my rewatch, taking notes for this, I played that like 4 times in a row because I was just like, oh my God, that's so cool.
I also want to remind everybody that because Carson Teva shows up, we are only 2 degrees of separation away from Zeb.
Oh, I know. I thought for sure we were going to see him. And we didn't.
Thought we wouldn't see him at all. I know this is dangerously close to speculation, but I feel like I wasn't expecting to. I had said like, oh, he's not going to be in this show at all. Like that's why he was in Mando season 3 to kind of to satisfy that, check that box to make sure we were tided over. But now that Carson Teva's here, now my hopes are back up again. Where I'm like, maybe now it's possible.
Hey, if we can get the full HasLab funded and get over 17,000 backers and get a figure of Zeb, maybe we can get him in the show too. That's right.
What a day.
What a day.
Welcome to Zeb Day.
What did you two think about Jason's line, I have a bad feeling? Did we interpret that as, because it's very close to I have a bad feeling about this, right? Which is classic Star Wars line. But do you feel like, did you interpret that as him reacting to like being in tune with the Force?
That's
in that moment,
exactly where I went with. I was like, oh, he's having Force tinglies and they're not fun right now. But what was even better about that line is that he starts it with Mom. and then goes into it. And I'm just like, wow, like you don't get that much. And it is that moment of purity in this very rough moment. And maybe he's not understanding what he's feeling at the time, but I completely felt it was a disturbance in the Force for him.
And it's pretty important too, I think, just to quickly, because the show's Hera's not the main focus, but to remind us or to share with us that she's a mom, that adds more importance to her. But I thought it was both. I thought there was a nice possibility that he could be strong with the Force, and there's certainly pedigree there. But I also think he's just intuitive in general, right? He can just sense it. Like, he's an empathetic person. His mom is extraordinarily empathetic, and she's not Force sensitive. So I love how they did it. And I'm glad you brought it up, Jen, because it's sort of ambiguous. Like, it's certainly plausible, and I think no one would bat an eye and say, well, Jason's Force sensitive. Well, of course he is. His dad's Kanan Jarrus. But it's also possible he just understands it. And who knows what he's seen in his short life. I did like the line, how come I always have to listen to the rules, but you can do whatever you want? She's like, well, when you're a general, you can break the rules too, or whatever she says.
Yeah, so put on your seatbelt.
Yeah. That's right. And then Chopper.
And I'm pretty sure Chopper says, yeah, what's up with that? Like, I went back and rewatched his lines, and it sounds like he's saying, yeah, what's up with that?
Which is such a great instigator, really. Oh, man. Is there anything else? Yeah, go ahead.
Just before we leave the Hera stuff, I actually, it caught me by surprise. I teared up when Carson Teva shows up, and then she says, once a rebel, always a rebel. And we had seen that in the trailer. So it really took me by surprise that I was really reacting to that. But it was such a great moment that she finally feels more comfortable in her skin, right? Like we've seen how she's had to kind of deal with the New Republic's bureaucracy, right? And it was really funny how Lieutenant Officer Hawkins? I think Hawkins is his name. Yeah. But he plays that with such comedy.
Yes.
Where he's like befuddled and is like, well, this is not following the regulations. What do we do? And she's just like, get over it. Like, it's fine. I'm going.
You'll figure something out.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, is excellent and as adept as she is working with people and being a leader. She is at her best when she's in the cockpit of the Ghost. And then I'm glad you brought that line, because once a rebel, always a rebel. A classic Hera line, a nice hearkening back to Star Wars Rebels, but this is Hera, right? In the Ghost. And it just doesn't get much better than that. So now we've got this StarWars.com reveal today that in, I believe, 10 cities and also across the pond as well, they're going to be showing the 5th part of Ahsoka on a big screen. Ross and I texted back and forth about going to Chicago. Ultimately, I erred on the side of I wouldn't get home until super late, and I couldn't do that to my son. I certainly couldn't do it without him, but it all got booked anyway. The tickets are free, but when you go onto the website and you can go to it through StarWars.com, you can get on a wait list because they've all been claimed. What a cool master stroke, and I'm really excited about that. And Ross, you did get 2.
I did.
Oh, excellent. Nicely done.
So
I'm on the wait list in LA.
That's only a 3.5-hour drive during the week for me, so no biggie.
Hey,
but you would do it for this.
Oh, yeah.
If it was just me, I would do it, but I just couldn't, as much as Mason is into Ahsoka, I just couldn't do that to him. But it's so tempting. I'll have to live vicariously through you. And of course, I'm assuming you'll bring Monica with you. So I'm calling her dibs on her swag. I just wanted to say.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see if she makes it. If she doesn't know if she's going to go. So I don't know if that is Greg from Rebel Base Card joining, or if I'm
he won't want the swag.
Daniel Lowe, or we'll see what happens there. So that there is not a confirmation on what's happening with the second ticket yet.
Hey, it's great. It's a terrific thing. Is there anything else that you have either of you have on your notes that you would like to bring up before we wrap things up?
Well, I haven't done Academic Corner yet.
I've been waiting.
Been waiting for the right time.
Yes.
And we've sort of like come close, but not quite at a moment where there's a connection. And we haven't talked about the very, very end of the episode. So hopefully this will give us a chance
that little
thing,
nuggets.
a little detail. A surprise guest and showing up at the World Between Worlds. Really nothing at all. But I said my word for the episode was haunting. That was partially for me too, as an Ahsoka fan, because the look on her face when she hears Anakin's voice is she looks so spooked. And that led me to the concept of the uncanny. And that then led me, of course, to Freud, because Freud has an essay that he wrote called The Uncanny. That's really about sort of like, he calls it Heimlich and unheimlich, where it's like what makes things really creepy psychologically. And for me, that helped me kind of unlock a lot of the subtext for this episode, especially in terms of where it ends and where it ends for Ahsoka. Because for me, it's like this idea of repetition that's really uncanny, right? She's been to the World Between Worlds before. And when she was there before, it was with Ezra, and the current conflict, right, really is, he's not there yet, but we haven't seen him yet in person, but it's very much, especially her conflict with Sabine, very much revolving around Ezra. And so to me, there was just this like weird, like mirroring and cyclical thing. And so I went back and kind of reread Freud's The Uncanny, and I came up, it was actually really hard to find one, like a quote, because Freud's writing style is very sort of inductive, where he's just kind of circling. And so it was hard to isolate something that was kind of neat and tidy for me to read. But what I came up with was, and now where is it? He says, there is the constant recurrence of similar situations, the same face, a character trait, or a twist of fortune, or a same crime, which, depending on the translation you look at, might also be misdeed, right? So I think that kind of is inclusive of stuff happening in the show too. Or even a same name recurring throughout several consecutive generations. So like, if that's not Star Wars, I don't know what it is, right?
It's pretty great.
The theme of the double has been very thoroughly treated by Otto Rank, who's this other scholar. He has gone into the connections the double has with reflections and mirrors, with shadows, guardian spirits, with the belief in the soul and the fear of death. But he also lets in a flood of light on the astonishing evolution of the idea. For the double was originally an insurance against destruction to the ego, an energetic denial of the power of death. And he also, it goes on to sort of talk about how like the concept of the immortal soul was originally psychologically as the first double, as a sort of a survival mechanism. And so to me, obviously there are a lot of kind of conceptual touchstones that remind me a lot of Star Wars in general, but also specifically this episode and the concepts of the World Between Worlds. But to me, this is sort of like we've reached Ahsoka's sort of existential moment.
Yes.
And she's going to have to sort of face this ghost of Anakin, manifestation of Anakin through the Force. It's unclear. He sort of has a line that indicates this is like Jedi afterlife. I don't know, which I was like, that was not my understanding of the World Between Worlds. So I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on that. But yeah, to me, it really captured this feeling of like this whole series is like her returning to these various conflicts that she's had in her life. And if you go back to, and I'm almost done, if you go back to the Siege of Mandalore and her experience of Order 66, it's this really, this creepy thing where you, as an audience, we know what's happening, but she is so blinded by her love of Anakin that she can't process what Maul is trying to tell her, right? And I feel like this is that moment, and she's carried that guilt with her of, if only I hadn't had a personal attachment, I might have been able to prevent the Empire rising to power. And I feel like that's what's motivating her right now, is she knows that she made the mistake before and she can't make it again.
That's so beautifully said. Wow.
And way to make it. Congrats on making it through the Freudian quote without a slip.
Yes.
That would have been probably better, because then you could have made a joke about that.
Well, so, I'm the Anakin thing is terrific. And I've heard some people complaining about the CG for Hayden Christensen. And, I was certainly had some challenges with the new Indiana Jones film, but that was, 20 plus minutes as opposed to like 5 seconds. Here's what I'll say about this. It didn't affect me at all. It didn't bother me at all. It did not take away from the pathos, the thrill, the excitement of the moment. Would you rather have someone else be Anakin Skywalker? Would you rather Anakin Skywalker not show up? Or would you rather be Hayden Christensen a little bit de-aged to represent where Anakin Skywalker might be in this existential timeline in Star Wars? Because that's what I would rather have. Again, that's just me, but I don't know. And I also heard someone say fan service. I find that sort of offensive in a very non-important way, because it's not fan service. This is a story that spans generations in the real world with us and our children and our parents, and also in the Star Wars universe itself. Anakin Skywalker is linked to Ahsoka Tano, and that has happened since Star Wars The Clone Wars first debuted. That you have to have that if you're going to tell a full overarching story. I think it's fair to say that Ahsoka is more dependent on pre-existing knowledge of Star Wars than possibly anything that we've ever seen since Revenge of the Sith. And it works for me, it works for us, because we're obviously very ensconced in this lore. But is there enough of a gateway there to draw people in? I think yes, because I think you'll be very fascinated to see who's this guy at the end. She obviously very excited to see him, and where are they? I think it all is just this wonderful cocktail of compelling mythological constructs. So A World Between Worlds, there's so little we know about it. We know the Emperor knew about the existence of it. We knew he wanted to take it over and use it to take over the universes, and he could have quite easily, but it also sort of repelled him. Ahsoka and Ezra are responsible for that. But Ahsoka, in a way, sort of borrowed time because she was pulled out of time, fighting with Vader by Ezra. Then she's put back into it, and her life is saved, and then somehow she ends up, in another place, and she gets reunited with our friends later. So this is a really long explanation, but I promise I'm going somewhere with it. So I don't see Anakin as anything other than a Force ghost. And I think when you're in a World Between Worlds, the rules are quite a bit different and strange. I think the World Between Worlds episode is one of the best things that ever happened in the mythology of Star Wars, because it shows there's so much that can happen that we don't know about, which gives it much more of a fantasy vibe. I mean, it's always been science fantasy, not science fiction, because it doesn't try to really honestly argue for realism. But takes it to a whole other place. And my assumption, and I'm trying not to speculate, but my assumption is this is going to be a great learning moment, a great apotheosis moment for Ahsoka Tano, where she gets a chance to make peace with the inner demon that is Anakin Skywalker and all that might entail. But it's just the most wonderful way. And of course, I was aware there was a Hayden Christensen rumor, but I was really good about muting that from my brain, using mental whiteout, whatever you want to say, because I didn't want to think about it. And then when it showed up, it was just as it should be in this story. Okay, I think I'm done. I think my microphone just ran out of batteries.
Yeah, but it's a scene like that bridges so many different stories, so many different characters, films, books, animation, live action, to bring all of that into just I don't know, what is that, a minute long? If that.
It barely, probably not even that.
Like that's a beautiful moment of storytelling. And that, if people have a problem with it, I'm sorry you looked at it too intensely at some point. I enjoy just sitting back and letting the story come to me, and I want to enjoy things, so I'm not trying to pick apart as I go. I brought up a point earlier in the show where I'm just like, okay, this jumped at me, but everything about this scene for me was just, this is the magic of Star Wars, and this is why I love what George Lucas started and that Filoni is moving forward right now.
And when we get to see Hayden Christensen, live action Anakin Skywalker, the Anakin that we fell in love with live action Ahsoka Tano. If you would have told me this during the Clone Wars Rebels, it would have been like the ultimate fan fantasy, right? And I don't know if any of you caught this, but the second time I used the captions, he calls her Snips.
Snips.
Yeah.
I lost it.
Yes.
Lost it at that moment because I did catch it the first time I saw it. And all the feels came rushing in.
That's like the first thing he says to her. So it's a little bit further in the distance. And I thought I heard it on the first
mysterious
listen.
Stranger or mysterious voice. It doesn't say Anakin.
Yeah. I
knew immediately. It was. And okay, to go back to the question of viewers who have seen all the animated history versus viewers who are coming to this with just live action or pretty fresh. To me, this scene to them, I would assume reads more just like sort of a classic fantasy trope of, and spoilers for Harry Potter and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. If you so fast forward for like 20 seconds if you don't want those spoiled for some reason. But it feels to me like that kind of liminal space purgatory. You're being pulled towards death, but you could still come back.
Yep.
Right. Where you get some sort of key mentor moment, right? Especially with Harry and Dumbledore, I'm thinking of where they have that conversation and then he's ready to go back into the battle. Right. And same thing with Rocket and Lila in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. It's, he's on the verge of death and she says, it's not your time yet. Right. Here we hear Anakin say, I wasn't expecting you so soon.
Yeah.
I was like, he was expecting her. Like, what? I want to know so much more about that. But yeah, to me, that's how it would read if you don't have the history. But if you do have the history, it's like the emotions are just magnified exponentially.
This is the Joseph Campbell apotheosis. This is the hero's moment. In the apotheosis, the hero dies and is reborn. Often that is a physical death. But sometimes it is a spiritual death to an old way of thinking and a rebirth into a completely new point of view that changes you irrevocably forever. And I have the feeling this is what we're seeing. And the Harry Potter thing is great. Mason actually brought that up too. Because it works. It works so, so beautifully. And the cinematic transition of the water slowly turning into this mystical energy. And then the camera zooms back and I'm like, she's in a world between worlds. It's live action. Like, I still am not going to call this Rebels season 5 because it's not. But this is so great. This is so great. I mean,
how do you think this changes our understanding of the world between worlds? Like, what are we learning about the world between worlds through this?
I think we'll be better able to answer that next week.
Okay.
I don't think we have enough of a sample size. Because there's so little we know. I got to write about it for the Star Wars book, and there's just not much to say besides what is in that episode. But it's pretty rich, and it if anything, it says, hey, all those rules that we have established? There's more. We're not eliminating what was there before, but there is more. And I think there's so much more that we're going to learn next week. Isn't it great? Again, to have Star Wars appointment television where you know that everybody at 8 o'clock Central Time, 6 o'clock Pacific Time, you're hitting refresh on Disney Plus, and it's working, and we're all experiencing it together across our own little worlds, between worlds. We can comment about it online, and then we've got that excitement of, I can't wait till next Tuesday. And I feel that way. I think this is the Star Wars series I've been waiting for my entire life. The live action Star Wars I've been waiting for my entire life. I just think it's wonderful. And I'm glad because I liked the first episode fine, but this is so much more. It's so much more. Is there anything more that we need to say about this episode before we wrap up?
We need our letter grades.
Well, of course. Yes, definitely going to give our letter grades. Any key plot points that I didn't mention or that we want to talk about? Can't believe I almost forgot about Anakin.
We're not ending this without talking about that.
No, I'm glad you brought it up. It would have dawned on me.
Oh, we would have talked about it before we went off. I promise.
Yes.
Oh, I guess I did have one question, and we don't really have to fully answer this, but there's 2 hints to a betrayal by Ahsoka to Sabine by Balin, right? He says, It's the line Dan mentioned earlier of, I will keep my word, unlike your former master.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, what is that referring to? But then that combined with your family died on Mandalore because your master didn't trust you.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
I don't.
His head.
Because she died. Because that doesn't make sense from the timeline. Because her family died before she had anything to do with Ahsoka. Really, I mean, she was around.
Is that true? Because in Rebels,
yeah, they were still
Ross
around.
can probably help us.
Because they rescued her father.
But Ahsoka wasn't a part of that.
Right, Ahsoka wasn't there.
So it can't.
Then they went their own separate ways after that because Sabine left Clan Ren again to come rejoin the rebels.
Right, which we don't see that separation or any of that stuff. We saw when her father died, which I think is the first episode of season 4.
But I feel like this probably has to sync up with Bo-Katan in some way. Right?
Or maybe
I feel like this is the Night of 1,000 Tears.
Mm-hmm.
And something like they were involved with that somehow. We just don't know how. That's the only thing I could think of in terms of, because we are working towards a Mandoverse movie.
That's right.
Syncing up that history for all these characters makes sense.
Oh, this is going to be great. I can't stand it. I don't know what that means. I caught that line too. I was thinking about it. I'm like, what is he talking about? Because Ahsoka really has nothing to do with that aspect of Sabine's life that we know of. So it's really going to have to be unique to be able to fit that into that puzzle. Unless it's somehow related to Anakin, but Anakin isn't related to Sabine at all. I mean, 0. So who knows?
That we know of.
Well, yeah, that
and
would be
the line implies that they were master and Padawan at the time because your master didn't trust you.
Right.
Because it speaks to their fraught relationship as teacher and student.
Right. Which still... we need to see more evidence of that. There's so many more stories to be told, and I hope we get a chance to.
Yeah, we're only halfway done.
That's right. And there's just so much more. And I was thinking about the other day, boy, how, the rebels had to be ostensibly a part of the rebellion against the Empire post Luke Skywalker and the Death Star. But there's a lot of great stories there. There's a lot of great stories of Hera working with the New Republic and just Zeb becoming an X-Wing pilot and all this great stuff. So much fun. We're going off the rails a little bit here. So we're probably going to wrap this up, but let's give our final thoughts and letter grade. Ross, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I'm giving it an A. It is, I'm going to go probably like a 94-ish. Which I know you're going to go much higher than that. I still think more.
This isn't an A+.
Well, and maybe because it broke my heart that Sabine broke down. Maybe
I'm very sad listeners cannot see Dan's face right now. He's losing his mind over there.
I am. You may have heard something squishy fall out of my ear.
But I don't know how many times I've given an A early in a season.
Yeah.
So I consider this a super great grade for this.
I'm ruining the rest of this podcast under protest. Okay, that's great. No, that's cool.
It's been great joining the CWK for the first half of the season.
Hey.
I look forward to seeing who is in the second half of the season.
Ross is in the world between worlds. He cannot be reached.
That's right. No, Ross, you're stuck, buddy. You're stuck. Okay, Jen, what about you?
All right. So, at the risk of making you blow your top again.
No.
I want so badly to give this an A+. So badly. It was a revelation of an episode. Some of the best lightsaber duels I've seen since the original trilogy. And I know that's a big take, but I may backtrack on that the more I think about it. But that's how I'm feeling right now. It was such a high of an episode, but I feel like it's going to be so much more meaningful if I save that plus for next week, because buckle up, folks, for some weird Dave Filoni Force stuff. It's going to be so trippy and so amazing. And I feel like because the world between worlds is now on the table, I feel like it just opens up a whole, so many other possibilities. I'm so excited. And the rumors critically has been from people who have worked on the show that this next episode 5 is the sort of crown jewel of the season. So,
yep. Which is why it's going to be on the big screen. So I'm giving it probably C-. It was fine. Just kidding. As Mason said, and I said, what would you give this grade? I said A+. And he goes, there aren't enough pluses. I agree. This is an A+++++. I don't know how this one is topped. I mean, if you want to talk about the emotional impact this had, taking, again, Star Wars is always at its best to me when we take familiar archetypes and plus them and add new wrinkles and add new surprises. The lightsaber sequences you mentioned, we barely talked about them. Ahsoka uses the Force telekinesis to move someone into someone else as they're blasted and moves them back. There's so many cool things that happen. Her jumping off these
that
rocks.
Flip off the rock. Yeah.
Yes. Just there's so much great stuff. Suspense, mystery, the appearance of Hayden Christensen in a world between worlds. I mean, besides me magically appearing riding a Loth Wolf, I don't know what else would be more surprised. That would be really surprising. I would think I would remember something like that. This is just terrific.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are with Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is
It's terrific storytelling. It augments what we already know and challenges us to think of things differently. And I could not be happier. I have a bag that has plenty of pluses and minuses. I have given Fs. I gave a couple episodes of Willow an F. I mean, I have no problem doing that. I'm not a generous grader, but just for me and my little happy little rubric, I base it on how I feel, what it teaches me about Star Wars, what it helps me appreciate about Star Wars, and what it adds to the mythology. And this is it. Maybe that would be fun to do a whole episode where the three of us explain our rubrics. If you would have told the first year teacher, Dan, that I would actually want to talk about rubrics, he probably wouldn't have believed it. But here we are. Oh, this is fabulous as always. I can't tell you how much it highlighted for me to talk to the both of you about Ahsoka each and every week. You are so much fun to process with and to learn from and to laugh with. And I can't tell you again how much I appreciate you both. And the great news is you're still stuck with me. Not only Ross, but Jen, you're stuck with me too for another month, and I could not be happier about it.
No, we love it too. It's good stuff.
Yeah, we're like Hu Yang says, we're at our best when we stay together. So
that's right. And I when this happened, I was like, have they never seen Scooby-Doo? Why are you splitting up? Are you kidding? Yoicks!
In the woods.
Yeah, right. The woods and the leaves and okay. And there's like Force mosquitoes flying around out of Inquisitors' bodies, all kinds of crazy stuff. All right, Ross, please let everybody know where they can find you and hear more of your melodic tones.
Yeah, so I will ask people to check out Fantha Tracks for our recap articles. It is a group article that gets posted every weekend. So you're getting so many different thoughts from that. I was able to join Brian Cameron on Good Morning Tatooine.
You were great in that. You were awesome.
Oh, thank you so much. It was great talking to him. You know, just another evening of talking with a friend in Scotland over the internet about Star Wars for a while. So that was fantastic. But then instead of promoting one of mine, check out the Rebel Base Card and what Greg McLaughlin and Greg Cass are doing with their breakfast shows around Ahsoka. So they're super fun. So those guys, Colby and the Colby cast and his kids, and just the great community we have all over the place.
Aaron and David on Star Wars Reactions.
Yeah. Podcast Stardust.
Yes, with Dennis and Jay. A lot of great Ahsoka content out there.
Yeah, so enjoy it all. Everyone's great. Everyone's having fun, and it's so fun to listen and get those little nuggets out of each of these, or just like, oh, we didn't even talk about that, or oh, I didn't think of it that way. There's so many great ways to enjoy this right now.
And Jen, what about you?
Sure, you can find my writing on the longtake.substack.com, and I'm doing weekly breakdowns of Ahsoka while it's running. And really, this with this series, I'm leaning much more towards sort of lore breakdown and analysis than I normally do. It's much less a traditional a review in terms of like how good was this episode, and much more of a like what can we think about to better understand what we saw. So that's been really fun. And you can find me on Instagram and Threads at Sopchockchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI, and on Letterboxd at Qui-Gon Jinn.
Thank you so much to Ross and Jen for joining me once again to talk about the Disney Plus series, Ahsoka. Please go to coffeewithkenobi.com for Star Wars news, announcements, reviews, videos, and so much more. I am putting more and more into that site, and I hope you will check it out and let me know what you think. The official travel partner of Coffee with Kenobi is MEI and Mouse Fan Travel. Coffeewithkenobi.com/MouseFanTravel is where you can go to get a no-cost, no-obligation quote. They can help you plan your magical vacation to all things Disney, including the East and West Coast homes of Galaxy's Edge, Walt Disney World, and Disneyland. Looking to book that Disney cruise? Mouse Fan Travel can help make things as easy as possible and give you that peace of mind we all appreciate when planning our family vacations. Just go to, again, coffeewithkenobi.com/MouseFanTravel and let them know that Coffee with Kenobi and Dan Zare sent you. It is a great way to support me and the show and to get the best vacation possible. Speaking of supporting Coffee with Kenobi, go to thomascoffee.com. They are the official brew of Coffee with Kenobi. They have offered an exclusive code for Coffee with Kenobi listeners. Head over to thomascoffee.com to check them out and make sure to use that discount code of DanZCWK10 at checkout to save 10% off your order. CWK Live is Tuesday nights at 7 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time at coffeewithkenobi.com/live, which will take you to Facebook and YouTube. Either way, you can like, comment, watch, and chat with me and Coffee with Kenobi members from all over the world. Go to the Coffee with Kenobi Facebook group, which is our CWK Cafe, at coffeewithkenobi.com/community for Star Wars thoughts, comments, reviews, and opinions in a family-friendly, spoiler and drama-free place. It's also a great place to share your immediate thoughts on Ahsoka when you watch it, if you can't wait until you can join us on CWK Live. This show is literally possible because of the CWK Alliance. That is our Patreon page, and thanks to our members of the CWK Alliance, this podcast, Facebook Live, event coverage, and so much more comes to life. Find out how you can join the show and help us out for as little as $1 a month by joining the CWK Alliance, and you receive access to CWK Prover, an exclusive weekly audio and video podcast not heard anywhere else. Members at the CWK Alliance All-Star level receive a video edition of CWK Pour-Over and access to a private Facebook group as well. Plus, CWK Alliance Grandmaster join me for a monthly live video call, and that can all be found at coffeewithkenobi.com/CWK Alliance. And 10% of these monthly contributions that you give go directly to the St. Jude Children's Hospital. Got a question? You can email me, danz at coffeewithkenobi.com, or you can connect with me on Twitter at Mr. Zer, MRZEHR, on Instagram at DanZerCWK, and on LinkedIn. Coffee with Kenobi is on social media such as Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, and TikTok. You can give the show a like at facebook.com/coffeewithkenobi, or subscribe to Coffee with Kenobi's YouTube channel, where you can find over 700 videos, past live shows and events, and this podcast. Please take a couple of minutes to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Every review makes a big difference in letting other people know about the show. Like the Coffee with Kenobi logo designed by co-creator Corey Clubb, go to our TeePublic store at coffeewithkenobi.com/shop. And if you want to start a podcast or a blog or expand your brand, go to danzmedia.com. I'm available to help you with your brand, help you brainstorm whatever you need. And I can also come to your school, conference, business, or organization to talk about how to tap into your strengths and help you bring out your very best. Thank you, as always, for joining me for a virtual cup of coffee. I appreciate your time and look forward to the next opportunity to talk Star Wars with all of you. I'm Dan Zay, reminding you that this is the podcast you're looking for. Good journey, friends.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
There's no one here. Move along.